Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to call to order this special meeting of council. And today we've convened for the purpose of updating everyone on the emergency management plans of the municipality. Special focus on concerns that were expressed a few months ago about where we prepared for various pipeline issues. And I think, given some of the exhibits that we have available, maybe it would be best if we had this in committee of the whole. And Councillor Grant, thank you, and Councillor Lapworth, all in favor? Opposed to any? And now that's carried. And that's going to facilitate our ability to do a bit of a walkabout later, because we'll look at the command center and a little bit of touring. So I guess just for formality, I'll ask if there's any regrets here.
We do have regrets from Councillor Demoff and Councillor Khan.
All right, and will otherwise be joined in progress. Any declarations of pecuniary interest? It's hard to imagine any, but I don't see any. You can note. So that brings us to our discussion item, and the point of the meeting, which is the emergency management. And it's from the fire department. So, Deputy Chief Glynn, you're up.
Thank you and good afternoon. My name is Andy Glynn. I'm the Community Emergency Management Coordinator and also the Deputy Fire Chief for the town of Oakville. To begin, we are facing a time when being prepared and having a good emergency management program has never been so important. Whether it's the severity and frequency of extreme weather events, human health emergencies, terrorism, or technological emergencies such as the blackout, it's clear that we need to be better prepared than ever. This presentation will provide you an overview of the town's emergency management program, along with a brief summary of the rail and pipelines that travel through Oakville. We will also hear from Halton Region, Emergency Management Ontario, and Oakville Hydro, who will deliver presentations related to their specific areas. This afternoon we'll conclude with a tour of our Emergency Operations Center, as well as our command unit, our fire command unit. Before I begin, it is my experience that Oakville is a leader in emergency management. We are very progressive and have great support from our senior management. Our commitment to emergency preparedness was evident on how well we managed the recent ice storm. Being prepared will certainly help us reach our goal of being the most livable town in Canada. Now to begin my presentation. Just to begin, I'm going to talk a little bit today about both our response capabilities and our preparedness steps that we have taken. I also want to give a very high overview of the pipelines and railway companies operating in the Oakville area. This is to address some of the public interest that has been recently out there regarding rail lines. First, though, let's talk about legislation. What binds us to doing emergency management other than it's a great idea? This is the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act. This requires us to have an emergency plan, us being the municipality, to have an emergency plan, to have staff roles and responsibilities, as well as having a bylaw that adopts that emergency plan. This was updated in 2013 and currently in effect. What I am going to spend some time talking about today are the following. It's the Emergency Operations Center, the Emergency Operations Center notification, so how do we get notified? the declaration of an emergency, and I'm going to walk you through a bit about how to declare an emergency, what communications opportunities we have during an emergency, some of the roles and responsibilities of elected officials, the roles and responsibilities of staff in the Operations Center, where we would go if we need help, so our emergency assistance, some of our community partners. As well, I'm going to talk about the program, because I think the program is critical to having a good program means you respond a little more effectively. So I'm going to talk a little bit about our program structure, some of the hazard-specific plans that we've recently developed, and integration with the Halton Emergency Plan. The Emergency Operations Center. This is a centralized management center for emergency operations. It's the command and control facility responsible for carrying out functions at a strategic level in an emergency situation, and more importantly is to ensure continuity of services around the remainder of the town. The town's emergency control group, this is where they gather to implement the provisions of the emergency plan. This provides the big picture of the disaster. They do not normally, or the emergency control group do not normally direct operations at the scene. This is really left to the field staff. Their job is really to collect, gather information, and analyze data, make decisions that protect life and property, and maintain continuity of organizational information, and disseminate those decisions to all concerned agencies or individuals. I will leave you with this, that there's one person that will be in charge of that Emergency Operations Center, and that is the CAO or designate. The primary site is located here at Town Hall, and we'll have an opportunity to walk through that later on this afternoon. It's located in the rooms adjacent to this room here. Our secondary site, or alternate site, is at the regional building on Bronte Road. So if there was an emergency affecting this local area, for example, on the QEW, and we had to evacuate Town Hall, then we would be setting up at the regional building as our alternate. Also, the Emergency Operations Center is secured. It is off limits to media and the public. It needs to be secured by this front entrance here, and we do have provisions for that in place. Also, within our operations center, it's not just town staff that would be operating in the Emergency Operations Center. It could also be police, EMS, other Halton Region departments, or it could be other stakeholders with specific expertise in that area. For example, Union Gas. If there was a gas line emergency, Union Gas may be in the Emergency Operations Center, providing advice and assistance. Also, just to let you know that it is a requirement to exercise the Emergency Operations Center at least once a year. We do comply with that, and in some cases we do it on at least twice a year. Okay, so how do we get started? How do we know if we're going to escalate to activating our Emergency Operations Center? So what basically happens is the fire chief or the Community Emergency Management Coordinator would notify the town's executive management team. The fire department is most likely to be aware of an ongoing or pending emergency or the escalation of a serious emergency. When the windstorm happened during Midnight Madness last year, I was one of the first to get notified, and then I just raised the awareness to the CAO, and we took it from there as we went forward. So from that, once EMT is notified, then it is determined at that point in time whether we need to fully activate our Emergency Operations Center. Really, depending on what the outcome or what the severity of the incident is, would really determine whether we fully activate or we just go onto a standby mode. So in some situations, like a flood, it escalates. So not necessarily you would activate the Emergency Operations Center initially. It may take some time before you do that. One of the other individuals that we would notify immediately is our Public Information Officer. I find now it's critically important to get information out to the public as soon as possible. If not, we're laggards in trying to get that information out, as you've seen through Twitter and other social media mediums. Okay, the declaration of an emergency. The mayor, in consultation with members of the Emergency Control Group, has the power to declare an emergency exists within the boundaries of the town. And that could either be all or part of the town. Declaring this then gets escalated to the Solicitor General through Emergency Management Ontario, and then the termination of those declarations can be done by the mayor or majority vote of council. I will say declaring is optional. In some cases, it's clear that we need to declare an emergency. In some cases, it's not so clear. Communications during an emergency, an important part of any emergency response. The emergency plan outlines the following: Public Information Officer, the Media Coordinator, Manager of Service Oakville, Political Spokesperson, Administrative Spokesman, and Subject-Specific Spokespersons. So it's clear on what those roles and responsibilities are is outlined in the plan. I will say that the Public Information Officer is the Director of Strategy, Policy, and Communications. A Media Coordinator would be on scene, assisting and providing information on scene. Service Oakville would obviously be our call center, receiving calls from the public. Political spokesperson is the mayor. Administrative spokesperson is the CAO, and any subject-specific spokespersons would be other emergency responders. We have other ways of notifying the public during an emergency. One being the SENS program. If you're familiar with the Regional Community and Emergency Notification System, it utilizes a reverse 911 call out to the public. We have our website that we're constantly uploading in the Hero and in other areas of our website. The use of social media, as we've seen, becomes more and more important to get information out through social media, and we have that capability. We also utilize weather watches or warnings. Our media partners, so CP24 and other media outlets. Service Oakville as a call center that we could disseminate information through our call centers. A door-to-door campaign if we required, and all other forms of communications was shut down, we would utilize a door-to-door campaign. The use of building superintendents, notifying and talking with and communicating with building superintendents so information can be disseminated in case of a high-rise. Other community groups, in a lot of cases, it's speaking with the community groups to get information out to their partners. Neighbors, if we do get the message out to neighbors to check on other neighbors, that's an important method of communications. And the use of central meeting places where people tend to converge and we can post information in those locations. Council notification. The CAO is responsible to notify mayor and council. So how do we get updates out to council? We have a set protocol on when we would notify council of any of the updates. This is just, it's not limited to these specific events, but these are some that we have considered. So in the Emergency Operations Center, we have regular business cycle meetings where members of each of the functional teams would meet together to talk about ongoing issues. And immediately after that is done, information would be disseminated to council. If a situation deteriorates to such that we would need to notify council immediately and provide an update. If evacuations are required, in the event that there's an ongoing status report, and I'll just briefly talk about this. These are what's called situational reports. And as you remember, during the ice storm, there was meetings that we were holding twice a day, and information was then coming out to council immediately after that. And those are called sit reps, or situation reports. So we would relay appropriate and improved messaging from the emergency control group, and that's important because maintaining consistent messaging out in the members of the public is very important. The council may meet if necessary for briefings, depending on the situation. If emergency council meetings are called by the mayor, and endorsing any major decisions. For example, and these are just 3 examples, if there's extraordinary expenditures, major service reductions, and significant impact on life or property. I won't get into all the roles and responsibilities, other than just to say that it is required under the Emergency Management Civil Protection Act that we outline the roles and responsibilities for each member operating in the emergency control group. Each of the functional tables in the EOC do have binders, which used to be referred to as the football binder. But those red binders really have all the roles and responsibilities outlined, so that regardless of who's in there working within the Emergency Operations Center, they're going to have that red binder with all the same consistent messaging between staff that would be operating in the EOC. I just wanted to outline a few of the mayor's roles. Obviously, he's the spokesperson, interacts with the CAO, and interacts with the regional chair, and would attend press conferences as required. Also, just briefly talk about the recovery committee, and that is chaired by the mayor or the CAO, and that would be brought together in the event that it was a long-term recovery efforts are required. Emergency assistance. So where do we go if we need help here in the town of Oakville? First, we would look upon our neighbors within the region to request assistance, and this can be done through our mutual aid plans that are currently in place. We can ask the regional government to provide assistance if necessary, and the provincial government would obviously be a fallback to that if we did require assistance. And the last but not least is the federal government. And just to understand that there is a real protocol in place to activate each of these levels of government, and they need to be adhered to when we're requesting assistance. Some of our community partners, and this isn't an extensive list, but just some of them we wanted to highlight, is the Oakville Amateur Radio Club. And we do have in our fire command unit, as you see later on this afternoon, is that we do have a ham radio located in our command unit. And that would be in the event that all other communications fails, that we could use or call upon our amateur radio club to assist us in disseminating information from our fire command unit. Tow Wharf for marine emergencies, Oakville Hydro for power-related emergencies, and the CARE groups, which is the Community Assistance Emergency Response Groups, mainly comprised of the chemical manufacturers. Of course, Red Cross for the event that we need at our evacuation centers, Salvation Army to assist us with providing food on scene, and St. John's Ambulance for assistance with medical emergencies. So those are just some of our partners that we would call upon. So now getting into the program side of things, and I do believe the program really sets us up to succeed in the response side. I won't spend a lot of time on this, but I do want to talk about how the whole structure is set up. So the Oakville Emergency Management Committee structure We have our main overarching committee that is a requirement under the Act to get together once a year to discuss the program. And then we have a number of other subcommittees that focus on specific areas. The committee objectives maintain and will continue to focus on the 4 pillars of emergency management. They are the preparedness, mitigation, response, and recovery efforts. All these subcommittees meet at least once, more often twice a year, to discuss issues related to our program. Hazard-specific plans. I did want to brief you on our hazard-specific plans. As you know, there's been a lot of heightened public interest in a number of events that have occurred across Canada. So we recognized this and tried to address it by developing hazard-specific plans to deal with those specific issues. And as you know, here in Oakville, as we certainly do, the severe weather and power outage emergencies we've had to deal with over the last year, it really raised the awareness and the importance of focusing on those with specific plans. So we now have these 3 plans in place to deal with and help us mitigate those types of emergencies. These plans will be appendices to the town's emergency plan. Business continuity plans and emergency plans, departmental emergency plans. We've gone one step further to ensure that our departments, our town departments, have their own emergency plans specific to their areas of responsibility. And they've also developed business continuity plans to ensure continuity of operations in the event something does occur. And I'll just give you an example. Is during the health emergency, we had a reduction of 30% of our staff. How does a department still deliver services? So what this business continuity plan does, it really assists those departments in continuing their operations. We're leaders in this area, and I will say that across the entire province. Integration with Halton's emergency plan. As outlined in our emergency plan, it talks about when the emergency affects 2 or more municipalities that the region would then take over or assume the emergency control group, or when the resources of the town are deemed insufficient to control the emergency. The mayor and or senior municipal official would become members of the regional emergency control group. The remaining municipal staff would then support the mayor or senior official. And we do have a presentation coming up from Nick on the regional emergency management program, so he can elaborate on those. Moving on to the final aspect of our presentation is the rail and pipeline emergencies. Rail lines, we'll talk about both CN and CP. The pipeline companies, they're primarily the 5 of them that have pipelines in town of Oakville. When I talk about the rail lines, I mean the cargo rail lines. Obviously, there's others, GO Train, that do come through in VIA, but we'll speak to primarily the cargo rail providers. Just on a side note, I will say that based on some information I received, is that trucks carrying a vast amount of hazardous materials through Oakville. It's the QEW with the road transportation that carries a majority of the hazardous materials. And within the Credit Valley, between 2004 and 2009, there were 18 minor road-related accidents, were mostly involving goods not in transit. CN, the line, the Oakville line, is the main line south of Toronto, which supplies the rail traffic to the CN Grimsby, and the Dundas. CP is again, operates south of the QEW and between Burloak and Winston Churchill. And I'll just show you a map here. It's probably easier to understand. This rail line, this rail line that travels through Oakville is a secondary line, as they call it when you speak to CN. The main line actually travels up this way through Milton and through Halton Hills. Sorry, I'm pointing at this map behind you here. So the main line that carries the majority of the hazardous materials actually travels up through here, and it bypasses Oakville altogether. And then we have the one. The Oakville line supplies primarily Mississauga, some of Toronto, with some of the goods that are necessary in those areas. CP, we have the main line that travels through Oakville as well, but the primary line actually comes through Milton as well. It bypasses Oakville altogether. Rail line emergency responses. We've met with both CN and CP, and we've spoken with them extensively about what their emergency plans mean. And I do believe that they are well prepared to deal with any major emergency that may exist. Their maximum speed for the trains are 50 kilometers or 50 miles per hour through the town. They do a major route risk assessment, and they share that with us, and the mitigation for any of the dangerous goods that may be on those rail lines. And as you remember, based on the Lac-Mégantic incident, the Protective Direction number 32 was released more recently from the Minister of Transport. And this really outlines the importance of each of the rail carriers need to have emergency assistance plans, and they need to be able to provide that to the municipality. Also, the rail cars transporting products will be reinforced. So those are some of the outlines or some of the main points that came out of the Protective Direction number 32. And I just read a thing yesterday that the minister did announce that we will be in line with the placarding of all the vehicles, all the rail cars that are the same as what they have in the U.S. So those are some of the things that have happened. The pipelines. Again, I'll just briefly talk a little bit about each of those. The Trans-Northern pipelines that come through the town, the top types of products, as you can see. Trans-Canada pipelines, Enbridge, Union Gas, and Imperial Oil all have pipelines that come through Oakville. Again, here's another map of those pipelines. The one that's drawn a lot of attention is this Line 9, the Enbridge Line 9 in this green that comes through the very north part of the town. And it touches twice, once here and then through the very top, and then it's into Milton. So that's the reversal pipe Line 9. The other Enbridge line, which was interesting to note, was the one that comes through here in Upper Middle. This has been decommissioned, is not in service. So that Enbridge line now is just filled with nitrogen and has no product coming through that. So that's an interesting. Now, Union and TransCanada are up here too, and there are natural gas pipelines that go through here. Trans-Northern is down here, goes through the industrial area, which is the one that carries gasoline and jet fuel to Pearson. So those are some of the pipelines that are currently in Oakville. We've met with all the pipeline providers or the pipeline companies. We've talked to them about their emergency plans. We've discussed what their employee training and annual exercises are. We are becoming more and more involved with their exercises that they're doing. They have technicians and managers on call 24/7. They do regular patrols by both ground and air. They have remote pneumatic and manual shutoffs that they would utilize in the event that there's a pressure reduction in the line. And they do have emergency response teams that are on call. And finally, I'll leave you with what our response capability is to address some of these concerns or to address some of the issues. Is that we have regular meetings with both the rail and pipeline companies on a frequent basis. We are familiarized with their response plans, their emergency response plans. We do conduct exercises with those providers. And we do have our own hazardous materials response capabilities within the fire department that we're able to respond and mitigate incidences. And of course, our fire response capabilities, which includes things like foam that we're able to respond to. So I believe that we're prepared to deal with any eventuality or any emergency that may exist. So that concludes my presentation. Is there any questions, or sir, through you?
I think we'll get you a few questions here. I'm going to start at the far end and come this way, so I'll start with Councillor Knoll, and then Councillor Lapworth, and we'll keep on.
Thank you, Worship. A couple questions. First of all, the bane of North Council existence right now, and even I think Alan and Ward 1 is the new airways over Oakville. There's a consistent flyby of commercial aircraft all day long, all night long now as a result of the reorientation of the runways. That puts us obviously right under a very large aircraft all day long. Has there been any consideration given to increasing or enhancing our involvement with emergency preparedness from the GTAA as well as maybe even Burlington Air Park?
Well, certainly, if you remember in 2010, I'll just come back to the emergency preparedness preparations that we've done. Is in 2010, we did a field exercise that was conducted in Bronte Provincial Park. That exercise really was based around a aircraft that had went down into Bronte Park. So we have conducted exercises related to emergencies or aircraft emergencies. So that we have done. With respect to actually meeting with some of the carriers and discussing some of the emergency plans that may exist, we haven't, as this point in time, done that. I will say that with respect to calling out some of the assets the airport has, those things are available to us, like the crash truck. You may recall that was just recently utilized in Burlington at a fire. So we have access to those emergency assets that the airport would provide. So that's really where we are at this point.
Just know that, I mean, in addition to the noise complaints, there's a growing sense of unease particularly with some of the high, very notorious airplane crashes in the last little while, the one in the South Pacific and the one in San Francisco last year. So there is some apprehension about that. And not a lot. I mean, it's not like my big issue, but there are people that are mentioning it now, and I just think it should be something that we should definitely be on top of. I know the GTA has extensive procedures. I've been on a tour of their facilities, and I would just like to know that we're somehow coordinating with them sort of proactively, because frankly, there's probably more damage potentially from the air than even from the rail yards in the event of an emergency. So that was one question. You talked about the declaration of an emergency, and you mentioned that that an emergency can be declared if the mayor chooses to do so. Recently in Toronto, I'm not saying this for humor reasons, but recently in Toronto during the last big emergency back in December, the mayor of Toronto refused to declare emergency, much to the chagrin of some of his members of council. What would the reasons for not declaring an emergency be in that particular case? He obviously was getting, I'm not sure whether it was just him or whether there was a legitimate reason not to declare an emergency in that particular case, and what would those decision points be?
Certainly, I can't speak to what did occur in Toronto. That I'm not that familiar with. But for us here in Oakville, I mean, we would have that discussion at the EMT. And during the ice storm, we had those discussions on whether, it would be recommended that we declare. Some of the considerations, obviously, for declaring an emergency is if other levels of government declare or other municipalities declare. And certainly, in our case here, we had a pretty good grasp on what was going on here locally. So when you have, and I'll use an example here, is when you have a high-rise fire, there's a number of people that may get evacuated out of that high-rise, but we don't declare an emergency based on that event. So, and then you have a real significant event like what happened in Angus more recently with the tornado, that declaring an emergency makes a lot of sense. So there's somewhere in between in a lot of cases, and those decisions really are based around consultation with the mayor and the CAO and some of the EMT members. So, and I can go through the entire list if you'd like about what those considerations are. But I would say that there's a list out there that we would read through and answer, quite accurately about whether declaring an emergency is the appropriate step. We do have Emergency Management Ontario that will be speaking here shortly, and perhaps she can give you a little better understanding of what if through you, Mr. Chair, if you want.
Thank you very much. The reasons for declaring an emergency became somewhat blurred through that particular event that happened. But backing up to 14 years now with the current legislation in place, and as Andy mentioned, the recent event in Essa Township, Angus, the reason for declaring an emergency will allow council to access funds and resources that would normally have to go through a lengthy approval process. Under a declaration, and as Andy said, during that event, he would walk you through a decision-making process. But at the end of the day, it will allow you and your community control group to move forward rather quickly on a lot of things that might otherwise take time to do. Feedback from some of the communities that have had declarations during the ice storm is that they felt that all the resources in the community had gathered to help them. So it gave them a feeling of confidence and security that everybody was at the table for a specific reason under a declaration to bring any resources to bear, federal, provincial, or local. So those are just some of the reasons that a declaration was and is important for consideration and decision during an emergency.
I'm not sure this is an easy question as a follow-up. Is there a good reason not to declare an emergency other than believing that you have all of your ducks in a row, so to speak? Is there a downside to declaring an emergency?
To my knowledge, there's no downside, there's no timeline. You can declare an emergency in the morning and terminate it in the afternoon.
So that one may have been an ego issue. So my next question is Oakville Transit an active part of the EOC?
Yes, they are.
Okay. And the mayor is obviously a spokesperson, political spokesperson in any case. He's the spokesperson for us in general, but I assume that those duties go to the acting mayor in the case of his absence. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Okay, so that's covered under the Act as well?
That's covered under our plan.
Under our plan. Thank you very much.
Alrighty then, coming along the table, Councillor Lapworth.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Deputy Fire Chief Andy Glynn, thank you for your presentation.
You're welcome.
A lot of new information. I can still vaguely remember the air raid fire sirens going off in Britain in 1944-45. But that was before television, that was before the internet, that was before all the magic methods of communication we have today. Do you have the ability to patch into the Cogeco system to give a warning?
We don't have that technological capability right now, and nor, I think, would we. We would certainly pass information on to the weather network, for example, and have the weather network relay information on our behalf.
Okay, there. I had the weather network also on my list. And how about schools, notifying schools?
Notify them directly?
Yeah.
That we do have that capability. We do have contact information for the schools, and we could contact those key stakeholders or key contacts within the school system, sure.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Elger.
Thank you. Thanks for your presentation. I guess go back a few years when we had a full-on power outage in Oakville and across the whole of
2003.
2003. It was quite an eye-opener for everyone because they found out cell phones didn't work very well. Your radio didn't work unless you had a crank radio, and so many things didn't work except if you had a landline which was non-electronic, where it was just a phone attached to because Bell has pretty good power backup at each switch. And I'm wondering, is there anything we should be doing to to encourage all residents to ensure that they have a backup plan for communications, to make them aware of it, because I think most people wouldn't be aware of what will happen in a full-on power blackout, and that's my biggest concern.
Absolutely.
To get people to be aware of something and maybe get away from the area or get out of town type thing. How are we handling that?
Well, through you, Mr. Chair, there was a lot of lessons learned coming out of 2003 and the blackout that we faced. One of the big ones was generators. The number of generators sold after the 2003 blackout were just immense. So people are becoming more and more aware of the importance of being, having their own 72-hour plan. And the use of generators. I see a lot more generators being sold and residential services that are being put in place. So I think that one of the things obviously was the generators. But in addition to that is the fuel sources. And the generator's only so good if they got fuel. If they run out of fuel, that's a different story. So, I know here in Oakville, unfortunately I wasn't here in 2003, but I know provincially that there was a fuel plan that was put in place so people could identify where the fuel would be coming from. And that plan was in place as a result of the blackout. So those things together, along with the social media nowadays, I think it's really enhanced our ability to manage emergencies. Getting back to your question related to, is there more that we can do? Well, I think it's an evolution. There's always things that we're learning and based on every emergency we're faced with. The recent ice storm, there was a number of lessons learned coming out of the ice storm that really it makes us that much stronger and makes us that much better prepared to respond to emergencies. But I do know that landline, I still have one of those in my house, the old black telephone, and my daughter saw it the other day and said, "Dad, what's that?" And I said, "That's an old phone." But those are still in place, and I don't know if we can, tell people to go out and buy those, but I do think that during the recent ice storm, people were taking their cell phones, going into their vehicles, starting their vehicles and charging their cell phones and utilizing their cell phones to get information out, so.
Now, what about gas lines are a bit of an issue everywhere now. Do we know where all the shutoffs are, and do we have adequate shutoffs throughout all of Oakville? Well, I think a lot of crossing creeks and everything with gas lines. Do we have shutoffs on either side of every crossing of a creek?
So the pipeline companies, in conversation with them, they do two things. They can either manually shut down those valves, or they use a computer system to, if there's a pressure reduction in the valves for any reason, they automatically shut the valves down. So there's done in two ways. Some of the providers do have those valves located on either side of some of the waterways, and they could shut those down in relatively quick order if there was either manually or through that pressure reduction valve.
So if they're not in the area, does the fire department have all the knowledge of what to do?
No, that we do not have access to those. So
That's all outside of our control?
that's outside of our control.
Okay, because thank goodness we don't have a nuclear plant. I was reading this morning where now they're trying to figure out how to get iodine pills to everybody around a nuclear plant.
I read that.
And also with the fuel spent rods and going into the beside the lake in Kincardine now, they found out the foolproof system that they are based it on has now didn't work recently in Mexico. Anyway, keep up the good work. Keep us safe.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Albert. Councillor Giddings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You mentioned the Directive 32 is being reinforced. I didn't quite follow you on that one. Can you expand on that?
So Directive 32 has been initially, or sort of recently, released by the Minister of Transportation. That directive outlines the specific things that the rail companies must do as a result of Lac Mégantic. So those things now are in place. It's a requirement for those rail companies to follow those specific items that Protective Directive 32 does and talks to.
So being strengthened.
Strengthened.
It sounds like we have a pretty good idea in terms of what's flowing through the pipelines. Just curious about CN, specifically the Chartwell shunting yard. I understand they've gone through a number of changes over the past years in terms of the type of cargo that's passing through there as their customer base has changed. How often are they, do they refresh the information in terms of what is traveling through those yards? Because with a gas line, my guess is that it's either avgas or oil or natural gas, and that's what it was built for. Anything can go in a rail car or a tanker. Just curious how often they update that.
So now, according to Protective Directive 32, that they have to have emergency response plans related to every chemical that, or any hazardous chemical that is on the rail lines. So that stuff would be provided to if there was an emergency. As far as related to what's on those rail lines and what's in those rail cars, they have shared some of that information with us. Unfortunately, we're under a confidentiality requirement to that information. It's helped us build our plans, but we haven't shared that information publicly.
No, I understand. Do they track that in real time? Because those
No.
containers could be mineral oil 1 week, avgas another week. And so when they go through the identification stations and the micro coding is scanned, so you'd have no idea what on any specific day could be in those.
They certainly know. The rail lines would know, absolutely. And we could gain that access or try and get that information from the rail lines. But for us, for our planning purposes, we get a quarterly report on what has been transported.
What has gone through.
What's gone through.
How quickly can they update you if there's, if there was an incident, whether it be a leaking tanker or whatever?
I think relatively quick. Also bear in mind that the placards on the side of those rail cars really gives us a really good understanding of what's in that rail car. So if I show up at a scene of a rail derailment or any type of release from a rail car, I can identify what's in that car immediately through the placard system that's required under the Act.
I understand. So if it's leaking, I'm good with that. We can eyeball it. If it's in flames, it would be handy to know fairly quickly what kind of material it is that your guys are facing.
Well, yeah, absolutely. That would be important for us to know and gather that information, relatively quickly, for sure.
Yeah, so I guess my question is how quickly, in terms of real time, can they advise us in case of a catastrophe?
That's a good question. And you know what? I think through our correspondence with the rail companies and our working relationship with the rail companies, that I think we would get that information relatively quickly.
Councilor Bird? Yeah, I'm just ask a question. Do you have a list of inventory of available assets from, I'll call, non-traditional sort of organizations in the case of emergency? I'll tell you where I'm going on this. Like, for instance, one that would come to mind would be the Conservation Authority for sandbags, if you needed it. Would that be listed somewhere that they come back? The other one would be, I found out, I don't know by accident, that Halton is in 2 different military districts, one out of London and one out of Downsview. One, half the community would be reported through, I guess it's called the Hamilton Light Infantry. The other half of the community is, I guess, under the jurisdiction of the Lawrence Scots Cadets. But if we call there, I find out that they have inventories of night vision goggles and stuff like this that if you asked or there was a way, they could provide that. But I couldn't find anywhere where, I guess, the general in charge that a municipality has ever made a similar request. Is that something that we check to see if they have assets? I don't want to get into the mayor calling out the Toronto calling out the Royal Canadian Regiment to plow snow. That was, but that's too extreme. But there are other points where they do have access. The other one is a bomb unit.
Right, like a radiation.
In case you have a thing stationed in Downsview. But that information doesn't seem to percolate down to the other levels of government as well. Is there any plan to try to coordinate that sort of stuff?
Through you, Mr. Chair, that the questions regarding the military and Land Forces Central, I believe you're talking about, that's the Downview detachment of the military.
They have assets, and as does, what is it, I guess that's Princess Pat's, or what is the other one? We're a hybrid. I didn't know that, but we are. We're in two different military districts.
So it's always been my understanding is to request assets from the federal government and through the DND is there's a real process that needs to be in place to, I mean, obviously their agenda is not so much just domestic operations, it's national security. So with respect to a dirty bomb, obviously that's a national security response. So they do have assets that they would deploy during a dirty bomb incident. So that whole municipal versus the federal government request, that there is a real process in place, a protocol, checks and balances that need to be, that they need to go through before you can ask for those assets. Now, with respect to, we have a list of what those assets might be. We don't currently, I mean, unless the province has those lists, which I believe they do, because I remember back in those days when I worked for the province that we were a little more familiar with what assets might be available through the DND. So.
Well, I was just surprised because they say they have this, but they've never been asked. And I know the reason why, because we've got two parallel chains of commands.
Yeah.
But it seems from somebody sitting there, when someone's got stuff that you can use, we just don't know how to make the request as easy as mutual aid with another fire department, that there may be something worth looking at.
Well, let's
So I'll let it go.
let's just try to correct something there. We know how to ask. That was covered in one of the very first slides. And both the town manager, the CAO, Mr. Green, and our representative from Ontario Emergency Services would like to amplify that point. Why don't we start with that?
Thank you very much, Your Worship.
Oh, you just turned it off. So. There it's on.
It's a new button. Okay. Thank you very much, Your Worship. And Andy and I have talked about this on a number of occasions. Regarding accessing the military or Department of National Defence resources during an emergency, that would be part of your declaration. And that would go through Andy's coordination with the province of Ontario. They have a joint central task force office, and that's where that request would go through them. In terms of keeping inventory of what the Department of National Defence has, we don't do that at our level, but we work very closely with the Joint Task Force to ensure we're aware of what's available to a municipality.
Just in addition, I mean, we have developed over the years, mainly from exercises, a very extensive list of contacts, because, you know, the old statement is you don't know what you don't know, but what you do find out when you have these exercises, that's when you, especially in our case, we've often brought others to design the exercise where it's a surprise to us. And that is, in some ways, some of the best exercise we've done, because it's what forces you to think about what you actually don't have. So even the questions we're getting today is part of that learning, but that is one of the key things why we exercise the plan, because that's where you begin to find out what you don't know and how to then go and build that into your plan.
So if there was an accident, you'd be able to access what was in the freight cars?
That's right.
The quantities?
Yeah, I recently had a presentation from CN at FCM on this point, and the detail that they mentioned on this very point is that the manifest that's on the train is not the only manifest. The only access they have to the manifest, they also have it so that, you know, if it was damaged in a train accident, their central forces, their central command posts are able to provide it. So I was impressed with the degree of training and coordination that they described in their operating procedure. I'll now ask if there are a member of the public with questions for this session. Mr. Lansdowne, would you like to come up and speak into the microphone so that those at home can hear your question?
My name is Mike Lansdowne. I live in Bronte. And through you, Your Worship, to the chief, what I'd be interested to know is he's very kindly indicated where the pipelines run through the different through our municipality. And what I'm interested to know is, and there's a certain, it runs through a right-of-way, and there's a certain width to that right-of-way, which separates, in most cases, in our community, and probably will be growing more as we develop North Oakville. There'll be residences, people living on either side of that pipeline. What I was struck by was the explosion that took place in Otterburn in January of this year with the Trans-Canada pipeline. There was a very strong wind that day. The fire burnt for 12 hours, and the extent of the flames looked, from the point of view of somebody who looks at them through the internet, huge. And the only news was that they evacuated houses. I think they didn't say why they evacuated the houses. One assumed out of care and concern that the thing could spread. What I'd be interested to know is, I never did find out what the extent of that explosion was. In other words, I know the crater was 30 feet deep. That was documented. What I'd be very interested to know is, what is the extent of an explosion like that? And given the rights of way that we have passing through our municipality with the different product lines that we have, what kind of an explosive effect can we expect on the residences on each side? Is there any, do we have any knowledge on that? That's my question for you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Mr. Lansdowne.
Thank you.
Who wants to field that? Does Ontario, the chief, we'll let the chief.
Through you, Your Worship, that is a very difficult question, because certainly we would have trouble trying to predict what the wind speed and all those other things were, but I can certainly tell you that the width of the right-of-way is a factor of the legality of building pipelines, and I don't believe was ever designed with respect to whether a house in proximity to that right-of-way, should a catastrophic event on the pipeline occur, would be far enough away to be protected from the effects of that event. So the answer to your question, I think, is we would have to take immediate evacuation action, and it's very likely we would lose houses that were immediately adjacent to the right-of-way. And that's very similar to the circumstances we would have if we had a propane tank truck in a neighborhood delivering propane and something catastrophic happened. The potential explosion area, blast area from an event like that would very likely impact the houses immediately adjacent to the road as well. And that is certainly something that we take into account. And any type of an event involving a flammable gas, whether it's the most minor excavation of one of the small gas lines to a home in a subdivision, results in a full response on the part of our personnel. And our first goal arriving on the scene is determining if evacuation is immediately necessary, because it's one of those things that you got to go a long way at the front end, because it really is very difficult to catch up afterwards if you haven't taken sufficient action at the onset. So evacuation is primary in a built-up area with any type of event involving flammable gases, whether they're compressed, liquid, or otherwise. So that would be our first mitigation strategy. We do not at any time expect that any of the physical mitigation strategies in place will be adequate.
Thank you.
So Chief, maybe you could expand on, we had two minor events in recent time. One was the drilling in southeast Oakville, where a pocket of natural gas was struck and a potentially dangerous leak ensued. And you might talk about the countermeasures that you took there. And in a very similar, in a very nearby location at the foot of Maple Grove, only a few years earlier, one of the homes had a natural gas explosion. There was a leak. Luckily, everyone was away, and the home exploded and was obliterated. And I live in the area, and we were all struck by the way no neighboring homes were damaged in that explosion, and yet there was next to nothing left of the original house. So maybe you could start with the first one and then speak about the other.
Well, the first event you discussed was a very unique situation, and brought to bear the effect of change of technology on all of our lives, because something known as geothermal heating, where they remove heat from the ground through various methods and use it to actually heat your home, and conversely in the summer remove the heat from your home and use it to heat the ground, was a rapidly developing technology. It became attractive to residents of Oakville. However, due to our development format, we do not have physically large lots, so to get the contact area that was required with the ground to make the geothermal work efficiently, instead of going horizontally as you would in a farmer's field, they went vertically straight down into the ground and drilled almost 600 feet vertical, about 30 feet away from a multi-million-dollar home in southeast Oakville. And this industry was at that point totally unregulated. Virtually anybody that wanted to could go to an auction yard, buy a used well drilling rig, take water well drilling off the side of it with a spray bomb, paint on, geothermal drilling, and they're in business. And they weren't regulated by the Ministry of Natural Resources, who deals with water well drillers, and they weren't regulated by the Ministry of the Environment, who regulates gas well drillers. They were just floating around in an industry by their own. This gentleman arrived and drilled this hole into the ground, and the nature of the drilling operation is a mix of water and compressed air. So if you have no real training in the process, you have no idea whether you may have hit something in the ground or not, because there's always air bubbling up out of the water that you're pumping into the ground. And while the public may not be aware, natural gas in its state in the ground has no odor. The odor that we've all become accustomed to smelling, whether it's in natural gas or propane, is actually put into the gas by the industry for that exact purpose, so that you're aware of it. Well, at the end of the day, this individual pulled up all his drilling equipment, and water and air was still bubbling out of this well, and he thought it might attract some attention in the neighborhood, so he put a cap on the well. What that did was force, which turned out to be the natural gas, to start to spread out into the ground, because he hadn't properly, I don't want to too much detail, but you put a steel pipe into the ground to start a well drilling process, and if you're a certified well driller that knows what you're doing, you drill that down to the hard rock, and then you seal it onto the rock so that if you hit something, nothing can leak out. Well, he didn't do that. The pipe was just sitting on top of the rock. So then the gas could come up, move out across the bedrock layer below the clay layer that we know we all have in the Oakville area. And as he was on the top of a hill, the rock and the clay area followed the slope down, and unfortunately right at the bottom of the slope, or fortunately, as may think, a home had a basement dug, and the basement, they'd stopped digging the basement and the pool for that home because they hit the hard rock and they couldn't go any further. So that individual, extremely fortunate, happened to have both a closed combustion natural gas water heater and a closed combustion furnace. That's one that draws the air from outside of the house. They were sitting at home and they could hear this bubbling noise in their basement and in their backyard. And what was actually happening is natural gas was bubbling up through their sump pump hole and all around their swimming pool and under the cover and lifting the cover of the winterized swimming pool in the backyard. So our trucks arrived to that situation, We bring gas detectors with us. It was immediately aware there was gas building in the home. We evacuated that home, evacuated the homes on either side, and not knowing about this drilling operation, assumed there was a major leak in some part of Union Gas's infrastructure and called them. They arrived on the scene and started testing, and sure enough, it was natural gas. And it was natural gas of exactly the chemical composition of Union Gas's natural gas. There's all kinds of different methanes in the ground, but this was commercial grade natural gas. So that caused a huge concern. And as we started the neighborhood to advise residents, and we're checking all their homes, we came upon this site where we could hear this bubbling frothing going on in the yard, and we see this derrick set up outside the house, and everybody sort of says, "What's that?" You know, and go over there and see what's going on. And that was the first thing that twigged us in that we had this issue. It very easily could have had several houses obliterated in the same manner that you're speaking of. With respect to that, the reason you normally lose the one house is the gas accumulates in the home, and it's kind of like a firecracker. There's a big bang in the firecracker, but the firecracker doesn't knock over your fence so there's enough energy trapped within the home that when it reaches the concentration where natural gas is flammable, it ignites and it's one big boom, and that energy blows the walls of the house over. And natural gas vents, it's lighter than air. So as soon as the walls go on the house, the concentration drops below and it no longer burns. The only thing you'll have burning now is any wood or anything. And usually not. There's no fire. It's just a big bang and the house collapses, the bricks go all over. And that's what happens with that. Interestingly enough, because of all the issues we had with that, we retained Canada's leading experts in the field of natural gas leakage and the way it moves under the ground, and used them as our experts. And we were so pleased with them, in fact, that Oakville Hydro since bought the company. GTEL, they were the lead agency on that job, and were the experts that the Ministry of Environment relied on, the Ministry of Natural Resources relied on. Those ministries both received provincial awards for the speed in which we changed the regulation in that area. One won the Amethyst Award, the other won the Emerald Award, and Oakville got a lot of credit across the country for the work that was done there to regulate the industry now across Ontario and a model for Canada. And just recently, the driller was fined $40,000 for the risk he put his employees to by not having any form of gas detection equipment attached to his drilling rig in the process. So that's sort of how that all rolled out. But for everyone involved, it does really show you that it's not the plan, it's the planning that matters, because you can never guess what's going to happen next. But you can have a plan in place that allows you to generally respond.
And in Oakville, we're very lucky also to have top flight people that we have to respond, because it's the ingenuity and the industry that you approach these problems with on the ground. It's clearly visible in this story. Mr. Green?
Thank you, Mayor Burton. Just to go back to pipelines and the pipeline corridors for a moment. In addition to the actual width of the corridors, which are generally easements, and in some cases property owned by the pipeline companies, our zoning bylaw does have additional setbacks from the corridors. They do vary depending on areas, but that is an addition. The whole issue, though, of risk-based land use planning is almost becoming a new science, and the TSSA, which is the Technical Safety Standards Authority, are actually in the process of developing guidelines for risk-based land use planning, in particular with pipelines. So that is in an evolution right now.
Great to know. Any others? Thank you very much. Let's see if this is actually going to work. You know, it's funny, sometimes it's red, sometimes it's green. I'm never sure. All right, then, a motion, we don't need a second because we're in committee of the whole. A motion to rise and report would be in order. Councillor Eldred, thank you. Oh, we have more presentations? I'm sorry. I got fooled by the number one here. Andy Glenn, you back up?
No, I've just got to get the next presentation up and ready, and then we'll have the region of Halton do a quick presentation.
Thank you. And the clerk did tell me that we also may need to have a little recess to do a walkabout,
We have two quick, a presentation from Halton Region, a presentation from Emergency Management Ontario that are relatively quick, and then finally the presentation from Oakville Hydro.
perfect. I'm in no hurry. I just got slightly misled.
Pass it.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Mayor Burton, members of council. My name is Nick Baczynski. I'm the Community Emergency Management Coordinator with Halton Region. I'd like to thank Deputy Glenn for inviting me to speak with you today a little bit. I'm just going to provide a little bit of a highlight of some of the activities that Halton Region has been up to in the past little while with regards to emergency management and how it relates to the town of Oakville. So some of the things that we've been spending a lot of time on recently is we're continuing to follow up on recommendations from the December ice storm. There are a lot of lessons that we learned from that, and we are working closely with all 4 of our municipalities in the region to implement improved communications, improved coordination of activities, improved information sharing, and I'm going to get into some detail on that in the next couple of slides. Deputy Glenn mentioned a little bit earlier about SENS, our Community Emergency Notification Service. Last November, Halton Region became the first municipality to have a geocoded reverse 911 system for calling out residents. In the past, we've been using White Pages telephone data to call residents. White Pages, as you can imagine, have only people who have their phone numbers listed. It does not include unlisted phone numbers and do not call numbers. By being able to access the 911 data, we're able to expand to approximately 99% of available phone numbers that are out there. We're not able to access cell numbers and nomadic VoIP numbers or voice over internet protocol phones. We're not able to access yet, and the CRTC is looking at how the telcos can provide that information. But we were able to make a huge leap forward in terms of the number of residents we would be able to reach in an emergency by using the 911 data. Another piece that we implemented or in the process of implementing is late last year we purchased a virtual emergency operations center software application. And the idea with this is that it provides us the ability to share information better than we already do. And I'll talk a little bit about that. So the purpose of it was to facilitate information sharing. As you can understand, and I'm sure you'll see when you get to tour the Emergency Operations Center, there's a lot of activity that goes on, but information tends to be the biggest thing that people need access to. By improving our ability to share information, by improving the ability for people to see that information, we're going to become that much more efficient and that much better when it comes to responding to incidents. It also streamlines the communication in the emergency operations centers and provides our members the ability to see real-time information anywhere. And another key activity was it enhances our record-keeping activities, and I'm sure I don't have to explain that to anyone here, how important it is to have good records, especially when you have something like an emergency going on for after the fact. So the software application that we acquired is called Disasterland. It's a web-based application. It's secure. The region hosts it on our own server with a backup, and it's mobile device compatible. So what that does is it allows us to activate and start coordinating our emergency control group from anywhere. And we were fortunate enough that we were in our testing stages in December during the ice storm with the software, and we started to apply it at that time and use it to be able to share information before we ever activated our Emergency Operations Center. In fact, we started using it December 19th, which was 4 days before the ice storm hit, to start compiling information and sharing it with our emergency control group and the regional chair. And we're also sharing it with our local municipalities through Andy as the CEMC for the town. So some of the features of Disasterland includes a status board, so you can see the key decisions that are happening and the key issues that are posted. We can load photographs or documents on it. Again, it's accessible from anywhere that you have web access or mobile device access. We have a common operating picture with our geographic information system. So all of our mapping and orthographic images are available from anywhere. We can connect to streaming video, and I know Oakville has it with their command vehicle that they can provide video. So if they're at a site and we need to see it in our emergency operations center, we'd be able to access that information live. It has the ability to track activities, and we call it Ticket Manager for assigning and tracking activities. And you can imagine well enough, whether it was the ice storm or any other incident, there's a lot of activities that are going on, and to ensure that someone is assigned that and follows up on it and completes it is critical. Too often, little things get dropped, and this provides us a way to track it much better than it currently was being done. Improves documentation. We can share all sorts of information with anyone who's on the system. We can share and store documents on it. So things like our emergency response plans. Andy mentioned the football that the town used to use, the giant binders with the plans and everything. We all carry our binders with us home, but I can also just access it on my BlackBerry without having to be able to carry a big binder with me everywhere. And similarly, contact information. We can load up all of our contact information and have it accessible anywhere. This may be a little bit hard to read, but this is actually from the ice storm. It's a copy of a situation report that we were putting together at the region. We're putting these out 3 times a day. It would update the activities for each of our departments in terms of impact of the storm, major activities that they're doing to respond to it, any major issues that were going on. And these were shared with the emergency control group, the regional chair, and the town, so that everyone was aware and kept informed at all times of what was happening. And as I said, we started this on December 19th, 4 days before the storm happened, and ran it right through until after the new year. The other nice feature that we have through Disasterland is resource management. We can start tracking all of our assets and our resources, what is available, what is deployed, and we can track the costs of those things. So after the fact, when we're trying to recover costs potentially from the province, right, we have a better ability to round up all the costs that were related to that incident and have it in a much easier format to be able to print and report on. It provides us the ability to share communications, position logs. Right now, everyone documents it on paper, if they even document anything at all. Again, very critical to have good notes. Too oftentimes, some decisions are made, whether there's an inquiry or a lawsuit, many years after the fact, and you have to recall what was the rationale behind that decision, who made that decision, what did we talk about. By having electronic logs to track all of that information, it's all time and date stamped by the user automatically. We have much better logging. And then it has its own internal email system and chat system for communicating. So in terms of the emergency services that the region provides, in an emergency, as Andy was mentioning, the town responds with its own resources and personnel. And the region supports the town with certain services, whether there's a declaration or a request for assistance or not. So things like water, wastewater, waste management, our public health, paramedic services, and our emergency social services. These are things that we provide on a day-to-day basis without the need for the town to request any additional assistance. Should the town require additional assistance, whether it's through a declaration or whether it's a request through either the mayor or the CAO to the region would step up to provide that assistance as possible. So for instance, during the ice storm, the region was providing, there's policing services, public health was in operation to check on things like our warming centers and evacuation center with foods. But most specifically, we did open evacuation centers in the region to provide shelter for residents who were displaced from their homes because of the lack of power and the cold. So when an evacuation center needs to be established, the region requests the municipality for a facility. As a region, we don't have a whole lot of beautiful facilities that we can house people. So we would look to something like a community center. We would ask the town, do you have a community center that we can use to set up as an evacuation center? The town continues to manage that facility, but the region would come in to help set up the evacuation center, working with our partners, the Canadian Red Cross, Salvation Army, and St. John Ambulance. And there's actually a photograph of an exercise that we did at QE Park Community Center, where we set up the cots as if it were an evacuation center. So I mentioned our partners that assist us with the evac centers. And, that would be it for just a quick overview of what we do. Open questions.
Thank you very much. Councillor Grant, I'll do it again, I'll come down.
I was actually just kind of looking to see, Halton Region just recently joined Twitter.
Halton Region has launched through you, Your Worship, Halton Region has just launched a Halton Region-wide, lack of a better word, corporate Twitter account. But for the past 2 years, the emergency management has had its own Twitter account called Be Prepared Halton. And going back to the July wind and microburst storms that we had, we were blasting out information and tips to residents. Anyone who's following us, here's what you need to do. We had, I think, another time in the summer, threat of a tornado, and we were telling people, get in your basements, take cover, and all of that. During the ice storm, we were tweeting extensively, and I think we gained something like 400 new followers during December.
My chain of thought was this, that it was unfortunate that you could access VoIP but still not cellular numbers. But most of the people that I knew with a cellular device were checking, during the ice storm at least, checking Twitter. And another shout out to Oakville Hydro for their good work during that. But also, I'm familiar with Be Prepared. It's good to know that they were connecting with Halton Region. That's news to me. But certainly connecting the two of them together, at least in the minds of people looking for information, would be a great idea. Because quite often people are right now looking on Twitter. Over the weekend, Cogeco was out for a while, and I noticed that everybody was checking Cogeco on Twitter to see what was going on. It's becoming the thing that people look to when they've got their mobile phone in hand. So if you can somehow merge the two accounts or make sure that people are checking either of them as things go along, that would be great.
And through you, Your Worship, we are looking at how we're going to best manage the two accounts. For the moment, because the new, let's call it the region-wide one was just launched, I believe it was last Wednesday. So that's going. The Be Prepared is still functioning. I think the ultimate direction is that they're going to be merged, and we'll just have the one account for people to follow.
Great, and just for future reference, in case people don't use Twitter, which I can't or not, is there any possibility in the future that you'd be able to talk to these other companies to get access to numbers? I think most of it's 289 in this area.
Through Your Worship, we are looking at what we could do with that. Now, as I mentioned, there's privacy issues and all of that. The CRTC has established a working group with the cellular providers on how they can open up that market and maintain privacy. This is a big issue when it came to the 911 data for us to be able to access it. It took years to happen. Hopefully with the cellular, it's going to happen a little bit quicker. On the other side of the equation, there's new technologies coming out to be able to blast messages in specific areas, and we've been looking at a couple of those recently to see whether there's any opportunities for us to be able to do that.
Okay. And since anti-spam law is kind of top of mind right now, is there any ideas behind perhaps using Be Prepared to have people sign up so that they can get information through email quickly if they're at a computer or on their cellular device?
That's a good question. One of the things that we had looked at is the ability to maintain that, and we found that other communities had done a registration sign-up type of thing, and numbers and emails change so frequently that they become stale dated in 6 to 12 months, and then soon you have this huge database that no longer functions. So we've talked with one of our vendors about how we might be able to work around that, but we haven't found a really great solution as yet.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Quinn.
Sorry, through you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to reassure you that none of this communication would be covered by the anti-spam legislation. It would never refer to that, so you're okay.
No, I was just using it as an example because, again, if you want to get email blasts out, and then just the whole thing was sort of top of mind.
Yeah, but you don't need it for business of government, so you're okay.
How about that? Government's exempt. Councillor Noe, you next. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you.
Ontario rocks next.
very much. My name is Daphne Farrell. I'm the field officer for the Golden Horseshoe sector. That sector starts at York Region, travels up to Dufferin County, all the way to Fort Erie, and back down to Norfolk County, 55 municipalities in all. Very happy to be here today. Thank you, Andy, for inviting me. And I'm very happy to be part of your team and part of the town of Oakville's planning. And I'm at the table, and my job is to pass on anything I can from the province of Ontario and to support your teams before, during, and after emergencies. So before I start, I want to focus on a couple of key points that Andy brought up. And he said, you are the leaders here in the town of Oakville. So let me be very specific, because I have a lot of communities. Across Ontario, there are 444 municipalities. So we have a lot of experience to draw on to make the statement. So specifically, you are the leaders in bringing business continuity to the table and integrating it with your emergency response plans. I've had the privilege of being here twice in the last few months to assist your staff in delivering continuity of operations planning. And there's been a very positive response from your people on that. And there's a lot of work that's been done already, and a lot of work that I see Andy and his team are planning to do. You are also leaders in bringing CNCP pipelines to the table and all the work that you've been doing with that group. Having hazard-specific plans, that's another lead position that your group has taken. And additionally, having presentations like this and training, all of these activities go towards making you better prepared to make those decisions at a time when not a lot of people can sit back. It is a time of trauma, and making decisions during trauma, the planning part of it, and I heard someone say it's not the plan, it's the planning. So going through these processes really gives you a leading edge on should anything happen here, be it pipelines, weather related, that you are better prepared because of the planning that you're doing through your teams. I want to make another very quick point for Emergency Management Ontario with regard to notifications. If you go on our website, Emergency Management Ontario website, you can sign up for weather alerts. And it will ask you to put in either your email, your Blackberries, whatever you want to put in there. You can sign up, and whenever there are warnings, it will hit up you on whatever method. So we've been running that. We also have an agreement with Palmerex, which is your Cogeco group. And Palmerex has a memorandum of understanding with the province of Ontario to run emergency notifications and messaging during emergencies. So please know that those are in place, and the minute that Andy makes a call to the province to alert us on a developing or an emergency that's already happening, we will handle that for your team and make sure that messaging gets out there. So I just wanted to make sure I answered some of those questions before I jumped into, and this is really going to be a fast track through what we do, because I want to make sure that you get to your tours. I'll talk a bit about field officers, who we are. I'll talk a bit about our program, best practices, and a couple of myths. So as I said, I am a field officer. We have 10 sectors across Ontario. Our job is to quietly fold into your team before, during, and after emergencies. And we will come in and we will sit with you. We will give you the benefit of anything that we have experienced, bring it to your table, and hopefully be a valuable member of your team during emergencies. We work with municipalities throughout the year. We compile a lot of information, and we provide training on a day-to-day basis when we're not actually out responding. Many of our team, we have various backgrounds: fire, police, EMS, and myself. I came from the chemical industry, 14 years as an environmental health and safety specialist with national and international risk management experience. Many of us attend at least 5 declared emergencies per year. We carry all our own equipment. We are self-sustaining when we hit the ground. This is what we look like geographically, and you can see you're down here in that Golden Horseshoe sector, and that's where most of the communities that I just mentioned, I'm responsible to work with those communities. Under the Municipal Emergency Management Program, I'm not going to talk a lot about that because I know Andy's done a lot of training with you. These are some of the things that are available to you in your municipality. If you had not had the opportunity to review your own emergency response plan, if you hadn't had the opportunity to review your own hazard identification and risk assessment or your list of critical infrastructure, please give Andy a call and have an opportunity to look at those documents. They're very, very informative. It really tells you what you're, not what might happen, but will likely happen in the town of Oakville, based on the work that Andy has done through that IRA. Fire, police, EMS, when a normal response capabilities are overwhelmed, that's when the call will come in to the province of Ontario. We do not take over your emergency. We do not go to the site. That's what fire, police, and EMS does. As I said, a deployed field officer like myself would fold into your group and work with you for anything that you might need. Why declare an emergency? We had that question come up earlier. It ensures that your community control group, based on your people, can deal with the situation in a coordinated approach. It reassures citizens that community leadership is managing this process. It facilitates requests for the federal resources. It allows a relaxation of normal procurement, hiring, etc. procedures. It publicizes the problems and facilitates requests for funding, often a requirement of certain assistance from our USAR teams and other resources available to the province. During an impending or potential emergency, we will come out here, as I said, and we can be deployed under order and request from you. During an emergency, your field officer will help you through that, provide advice and assistance to your team, and maintain a liaison position with the province for you. Our team can come with other representatives from various other ministries and various other teams. Best practices: effective emergency response, builds relationships among emergency responders and community leaders. Establishing all this before an emergency happens, I think that's going to be a go forward for all of the municipalities across Ontario. Best practices: we keep notes. We are very self-sufficient, and when we come out, we will be there for you before, during, and after an emergency, and we will attend all your meetings and help you understand your own personal preparedness and that for your family. Recent activities: I want to start off by telling you that I was there in the ice storm, December. I was at Halton Hills. I was at the Emergency Operations Center when the Premier was there, making decisions on how she was going to address some of the vulnerable population issues, getting them food and getting them generators and things that they might need. We provide training and networking opportunities. I was also at Dufferin County, and recently I was in Moosonee and Moose Factory Island and Kirkland Lake. So it's been a very busy year for Emergency Management Ontario. And just to let you know, I just spent the last 5 days in Essa Township in the town of Angus, and fully supported their program throughout the last 5 days. I can only tell you that these are very, very traumatic events. They're traumatic for me, they're traumatic for your emergency responders, and they're especially traumatic for your teams that are brought to the table in a very quick emergency kind of way. And the training that you do, I can't stress the importance of this kind of training that is available to you, because when you get there, and the training that you have allows you to start jumping in and making those critical, important decisions immediately, without having to run to your plan, without having to try and understand where you are. You already know that through your leadership team that you have. Declaring an emergency results in funding. That's a myth. And mandatory evacuations exist, and that's another myth. We can't make people leave their homes. We can't force people out of them, and we can't tell you that there is funding available, because we all know that that's a very scarce commodity, and that's why we have the Emergency Management and Civil Protection Act, so that municipalities can be prepared to respond to and prepare for their own emergencies. In summary, I've spoke to who I am as a field officer. I've talked about the program specifically. I've spoken to emergency response in Ontario, our deployment team. We also address First Nations and work with AANDC. I've spoken to you about some best practices and talked to you a little bit about the myths of emergency response. Are there any questions?
What ministry do you fall under?
Thank you very much. That's a good question. The ministry is Ministry of Community Safety and Correctional Services. That involves the OPP is in our ministry, the Office of the Fire Marshal, Forensic Sciences, Correctional Facilities, and Emergency Management Ontario.
Okay. And what is the, where do I go to sign up for your email blasts?
Thank you. Right on our website called Emergency Management Ontario, and it will have a section there. It's quite bolded, and it will ask you to sign up for alerts, weather alerts.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any others? Thank you very much for the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, Andy. Good afternoon. My name is Mike Brown. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at Oakville Hydro. I'm going to give a brief intro. We welcome the opportunity to be in front of this special session on emergency management with the Town Council. Andy asked us if we would put in front of this special session our development on outage management system. It's something we've been working on for the last year and a half. And when implemented, it's going to be one of the most fully integrated systems in the province, and I can say that with a great degree of pride. I'd like to maybe highlight just a couple of quick things that it does. It focuses on increased communications to customers and key stakeholders on statuses of outages. It improves the receipt of information from customers on outage information coming into call centers. It provides visual representation of outages, and also of equal importance, it provides guidance and support to our control room operators in doing triage, damage assessment, and assisting in the restoration. What I'd like to do this afternoon, I'd like to call on Jeff Mocha. Jeff is our Director of Asset Management at Oakville Hydro, as well as Smart Grid. For this afternoon, he is also responsible for the control room operations at Oakville Hydro, and he's the project lead on OMS. So I'd like to call Jeff up to kind of showcase a little glimpse to the future.
Okay, thank you. I'll jump right into it. So the outage management system that Oakville Hydro is putting in place, this is a picture of our control room. There's this existing software operational today in the control room. We call it our SCADA system, System Control and Data Acquisition. This is an application enhancement to what's already there. So we're not putting in anything that's a brand new architecture. It builds on the process we have in place. Mike ran down a bit of an intro. There is value for our own operators, the Oakville Hydro customer service reps, and also for the customers. And I'll expand on that as we go. There's a significant integration effort involved in our outage management system. First two phases we have complete. Our customer information data from our customer information system is fully integrated in with our OMS software. Also the location data, where are our customers geographically in the town of Oakville? All of those locations are integrated. We're in the middle of working through the network data. We have a GIS system, Geographic Information System, that engineering uses, very similar to what town of Oakville has. The same goals in mind. There's a challenge in taking all of that data and shaping it so that our SCADA system can understand it. Because it comes from a slightly different format. So we're 85% complete there, and that's where we're working right now to close off that last 15%. Planned for fourth quarter this year, we're looking at integrating our smart meter alarms. All of the smart meters in Oakville are equipped to be able to send us a message when they're out of power. Right now, those messages come in, but they're islanded in the smart meter data system. There's an effort to integrate that into the control room through the outage management software. So just moving specifically to the Oakville Hydro customer service representatives, this is a screen that they would work from. This is what the default screen looks like. On the left is a list of customers that have already called in to report that they're out of power. Because we do have our real customer data into our application for testing purposes now, I blanked out all of the names and phone numbers, but our customer service rep would be able to see who's been calling and who's out of power. On the right are outages that have been confirmed right in the control room by our operator. Those yellow zones are polygon shapes that are driven by the network data, and any of those lightning bolts can be clicked on to get more information right by our customer service rep. If there's a new caller, they press this new call button in the bottom corner, and a new screen comes up. There are 3 ways that our customer service reps can look up our customer information, either through the name of the person on the phone, their address, or their phone number. It's a really quick way to add new calls to the list. When they select a new call, a new screen pops up, and the customer that's been selected from the list as being in an outage situation is now displayed right on the map. Our CSR can see that green phone icon, and they know that is the actual home location. On this screen, they can also see some outage information. If I zoom in, there's a box with outage details available to the CSR. Specifically, there's some good information here, including how many customers are affected by this outage, what kind of messaging is in place that we can give to the public, and what's the estimated restoration time. All of that information would be managed directly by our control room operator and available on the system for the customer service rep. Moving into the actual control room, there's a more complex window just to give you a flavor of what the operators would be working with. But the takeaway here is that there's data supplied by the network. So our GIS tells us where our equipment is. When we've closed that last 15% gap, that information will be driving the outage area affected, as well as the number of customers affected. The operator doesn't have to intervene to try and figure it out from paper maps anymore. It would all be at their fingertips. The operator on their own would then be punching in the restoration time and any kind of message that's appropriate for public consumption based on what's happening in that situation. Planned for fourth quarter this year, we would also have a public outage portal that anyone can log into. This is just a sense for what it would look at with some sample outages. On this screen, for public consumption, we're not able to drill down to single home outages. And that's to protect the privacy and security of our customers. We don't want to reveal that information publicly on a home-by-home basis. The polygon that's drawn around the outage area is purposely vague. If you zoom in, sometimes it's hard to tell exactly what side of the street's out, but the philosophy from the vendor's perspective and really from ours is that if you're logging in to check for an outage and you can see you're right, even on that fine line, you're going to know that's your outage area. And we're not looking to divulge individual home outage information. There's a couple of key features on the screen for our customers. They can click on the envelope icon to report an outage right from the web, and that information goes right to the control room SCADA. They're also able to look up a summary of unplanned outages and a summary of planned outages just in a tabular list. So that's coming later this year. Just to highlight our next steps, what we're in the middle of right now is still working on that network data transfer so that we have all of our network information in our OMS. Following that, we're going to launch the application internally, get all of our customer service reps trained as well as our operators and get them familiar with the tool. For November 2014, we're planning to tie in those smart meter outage alarms. It's a bit of a gap between August and November. There's also some IT infrastructure work that we're finalizing that's going to allow us to make that external connection into SCADA. So that's going to happen in November. And then we would plan to launch the public outage portal by the end of the year. Any questions?
Thank you. Questions? I see pencils up, but I don't think there's questions.
Wow.
You got wows instead
Okay.
of questions. Thank you,
I can
Jeff.
take I'll take the wows. That's good. Yeah.
I really enjoyed earlier the revival of the old line, that you liked the company so much that you bought the company. That was good. Councillor Burrs.
Sitting here, haven't we gone a little backwards? You would know there's power out before somebody would go to the phone and tell you, wouldn't you, through the smart meter?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Today, the smart meters are equipped to report a power outage. Working with our peers who've actually tried to connect this to their control room, they generally see 20 to 30% success rate of those messages getting through because they're all reporting at the same time. The system's designed to get metering information on an hourly basis, and when they all report an outage at the same time, it just gets kind of blocked. You don't get everything through. As it stands today, since we don't have those meter alarms coming into the control room, the example I like to use, if we have one or two homes losing power, it's similar, very close to a couple of neighboring homes turning on and off their stoves. So there's a lot of noise on the system that we can't tell if it's an outage or just variation in consumption. So if there's really a significant event like a tree coming down, we see that at our broad system level, our stations can tell what's going on. But a very, very small localized fault might just trigger the local fuse protection, and we won't know until we get the smart meter alarms tied into the control room.
So you're still dependent on somebody going to your phone and
Yes.
phoning you and telling you what's going on.
Yeah, for the smaller localized problems, we're absolutely dependent, yeah.
All right, thanks very much.
Okay, you're welcome.
Your worship, that concludes our formal presentations. The next steps would be to do a walk through the Emergency Operations Center at your convenience.
Well, I'll tell you what we'll do is we'll turn on the microphone, hope it works. Sometimes it's
We will rise and report and adjourn and then take our tour in that fashion to save coming back to do those purely ceremonial things. So Councillor Elgar moves that we rise and report. All those in favor? And that carries. I rise and report that Council has met in Committee of the Whole and considered discussion item 1. And I would like a mover and seconder for my report, Councillor Knoll and Councillor Lapworth. All those in favor? And that carries. I think we still have quorum. I'd like a mover and seconder to receive the report. Councillor Elgar and Councillor Knoll, all in favor? And opposed, and that's carried. And now I'd like a mover and seconder for the confirmatory bylaw, Councillor Duddick and Councillor Johnston, all in favor? And that's carried, and that completes the agenda. Thank you for your time and attention. It's great working with you. We're adjourned to go on a tour.